sur le front climatique, le podcast de l'Observatoire Défense et Climat.
Hi, I'm Julia Tasse, the co-director of the Defense and Climate Observatory. I'm honored to represent the research fellows of this observatory as the host of this podcast. Today, it is our pleasure to interview General Middendorp, former Chief of Defense of the Netherlands. General Middendorp is a key spokesperson of the urgency to analyze and integrate the impacts of climate change into security and defense policies and practices. To do so, he is involved in many organizations, among which the International Military Council on Climate and Security as a founder and chairman. General, thank you very much for your time and for joining us here in Paris.
Thank you.
It's a real honor to get this opportunity to discuss with you about climate security. And I will start with a rather personal question. And I wanted to know what was particularly influential in your understanding and your awareness of the climate security issue. When was it? What was your main mission at this time? And was there a eureka moment when you realized that climate change would actually be a security matter?
Yeah. Well, looking back, I've been in the military for 40 years, and I must admit that climate change was hardly ever on the forefront of my mind. And I think that's the case for most military, not because they think it's not important, but because it's something far away and for other departments, not for them. My wake-up call was in 2009 when I was a commanding officer in the south of Afghanistan, in a province called Uruzgan. And there we were confronted with heavy fighting in a village called Chora. We had been fighting there for days to get the Taliban out of that village. Mm-hmm. In the end we succeeded, but only to find out that the tensions in that village were still there, which meant that the Taliban could return any moment. And it took us a while to find out why these tensions were there. And we found out that it was all about water, about the division of water, because there is a water scarcity. They are all farmers, they all need water, and they couldn't agree upon who get what part of the water. So we flew in some water managers, people who are more experienced in negotiating solutions, and they negotiated a solution that was satisfying to all the people there. And from that moment on, the village was stable. The Taliban could not return. And a year later, I could walk through the main street of Chora with our current king with very limited protection, which shows how it's completely turned around, which also shows that building security is not only about military victories, but also about solving the root causes of that friction. And in more and more crises, I found out that one of those root causes is the climate. And I've experienced that in Iraq, where IS occupied the Mosul Dam and used the control over water as a weapon over the population to influence the population. I saw that in Somalia, where the droughts pushed the people away from their homelands, and they hardly had a choice on how to survive and sustain their families, and were driven into the hands of piracy. So we were fighting piracy, but we were chasing farmers, poor farmers and fishermen. But the root cause was completely different, had to do with the droughts. And in Mali, we saw the same thing. The enormous droughts in the north took away the perspectives of the Tuareg tribes in the north, and kind of drove them into the hands of extremist organizations. So in many crises, I realized that the droughts and the climate circumstances act as kind of a risk multiplier and shape the security issues that we are dealing with. But I didn't connect that with climate change at that moment, because at that moment you're only just solving the problems of that moment, and climate change is something far away. But I made that relation when I became a chief of defense and was looking at how to further shape the organization to the future. And I came to the realization that climate change is one of the determining factors of our future security environment. If climate is deteriorating according to the scenarios that the IPCC and others predict, then that would mean that this world risk multiplying effect will only increase. and it has an enormous disrupting effect, especially on the fragile countries around Europe, which means that we can expect more conflicts within those countries, but also more migration flows as a result of that, and also more breeding grounds for extremism and for organized crime. So for me, climate change is one of the determining factors of our future security.
I have so many questions to ask based on what you just said.
Yeah.
A part of what you said is that climate change is both as the root of some conflicting situation or a threat multiplier, so really putting pressure on a fragile situation. And now that there is this awareness, I'm not saying that everyone is aware of this topic at all, but this awareness is growing. We have more and more people that are sensible to this situation, that are considering climate change indeed as a security matter. Starting from your experience, how this awareness grew? How did you see people getting interested in that topic? And how did you also encounter maybe difficulties, sharing this message? And another question that I have based on this first one was, once you convinced the military that was a security matter, what's next, How do you work to address this issue? Yeah. So that's a two-side question.
A double question, yeah. Well, let me first stress that it's not a security matter, it's also a security matter. Climate change is, of course, a much bigger problem, and I certainly don't want to securitize climate change, but it does have a lot of security effects, and I do think that the military can contribute to solving it. But we'll come back to that later. In the beginning, when I was still a chief of defense, I addressed this issue in the Halifax conference in Canada, and later in the Planetary Security Conference in The Hague. And I believe that I was the first active serving general to publicly explain the connection between climate and security, which was a big shock, especially in my country. It was in the run-up to elections. And climate change was kind of a left-wing topic, Green Party topic. And I came from defense, and defense is more seen as a right party topic. So it was a big shock that somebody from defense was explaining that climate change, which is a left-wing topic, is important, that we need to take care of that. So there was a big debate in Parliament. My minister was called to Parliament to explain what I was talking about and if I was talking on behalf of the cabinet. And so a lot of fuss, the media jumped all over it. But also the environmental groupings, they were shocked because they thought that I was hijacking their topic. They thought that I was using that topic to increase defense budgets. So they were also upset. And they warned me, you should not securitize it, etc. But within a week...
In which year?
That was in 2016.
Okay.
But within a week that first went over because all the fact checkers went over it. And, well, it was a sound story and it was quite factual. And interestingly, within the military, there was no discussion about this because all the soldiers had experienced the same thing as I had experienced in those missions and saw the logic of this relation. So within the military there was no discussion, but outside it was a big shock. And I got the nickname there of the Green General or the Climate General. So I accepted this as kind of an honorary title, and I even dedicated a book later called The Climate General to this. Unfortunately, still in Dutch. I'm looking for an international publisher.
For all our Dutch listeners.
Hopefully also a French version. That would be very nice.
Yes.
But I adopted it. And this is the only time ever that I went viral on social media. To show the fuss that it gave. But it made me more determined to do something about it because I was really more and more convinced that is maybe the biggest challenge we are facing this century, also from a security perspective. So a year later, when I ended my career as a military, I chose, I want to dedicate all the experience that I have, all the influence that I have to help solving this issue. And I found out that there were many more senior leaders like me all over the world that were also concerned about this. And that's kind of triggered the establishment of the International Military Council on Climate and Security. Very long name. It's a wrong name because it's not a council. It's not just military. So we have to find a new name, I would say. But it is a network. And in the first year, we made a global assessment of how is climate change already impacting our security in the different parts of the world. And then we looked, okay, now we need a platform to showcase this, to attract attention. And we found the Munich Security Conference willing to put this on the agenda. So I was there in a panel with John Kerry, with Ban Ki-moon, with the director of Greenpeace, and a few others, discussing climate and security.
So that shows the difference between 2016 and the year where the Munich conference accepted to have climate security on the agenda, which was 2019?
That was 2020.
2020. So in 4 years, the agenda really changed in terms of security.
Well, we got it on the agenda, but in the security community, this topic was not recognized. But because we got it on the agenda of the Munich Security Conference, which was for the first time in their history that they ever talked about climate, that triggered a lot of debate. So from that moment on, we were asked all over the place to explain this nexus, and a lot of debate was triggered by this. And also, meanwhile, we were doing a lot of research on the topic. So in the year after that, this awareness grew within the EU, within NATO, but also wider outside the more Western countries, also within the UN. A year later, I think it was more accepted as a fact that there is a security angle to this and that we need to deal with that, which is quite rapidly, which is good. It's not only because of us. I think it's because of a broader movement. More people have been working on this. But that meant that we can now shift our focus from building awareness towards building understanding, and from there to building solutions. And solutions in the sense of, okay, what can the security community contribute? What could be their role in addressing climate change?
So that was really clear on the shift or on the slow awareness that is now rising in the security community. And I think the way you experienced that topic is really unique because you were one of the first ones to talk about that topic. And now the second part of my double question was how to really address once we convince here in the Munich Security Conference, the security community that climate change is also a security problem. So you mentioned raising awareness, you mentioned building understanding. So that's what we do, and that's what's going on for a few years now, for a few years. The next step is, and you said identify solution, but how to address this topic of climate security?
Well, it starts with this awareness. People only change when they feel a need to change. And you don't feel the need without being aware of a problem. So that's where it starts. And this awareness is something that we need to continue building. We can shift to solutions. And I think there are different roles that the security community can play. First of all, they can help on the forecasting side. If we all recognize that climate change is an important accelerator of conflicts, then every intelligence analysis should include the climate factor. Because if you don't include it, you don't understand the conflict. And this is the main message to the intel communities. By including that in the analysis of fragile countries around us, potential crisis areas around us, you get a better understanding of the dynamic in such a conflict, and also of the climate dimension of that, which also enables you to link up with other civil players to help address the root causes. And we can bring a military component in that, but of course, addressing climate change is not a really military issue, so you need others like the EU, like development people to run adaptation plans on it. But it starts with analyzing it and including that in your intelligence side. And by doing that, we can also help and support broader whole of government forecasting. So we can help to get a better understanding of what kind of effects climate change brings to us. And we can fill in the security dimension of those effects and build a more comprehensive picture. A second role that we can play is on mitigation. The defense organization in any country is the biggest polluter of a country. I'm ashamed to say that, but it is a fact. Yeah, there is no company in most countries. There is no company that is polluting more than the military. We have an enormous number of ships and airplanes, etc., and we produce a lot of CO2. Within the government, most governments, we produce more than 50% of all government emissions. So in that regard, there is a responsibility that we need to take. And there is a lot of resistance against that within the military because there is a concern that it will only cost more money and it will affect the operational effectiveness of units. If you have to go to electric tanks, then probably the range of the tank will be less than the current tanks. For planes and ships and vessels, it's even more. So there is a concern that we shouldn't move that way because it will diminish our effectiveness. But here I say, well, let's turn it the other way around. The military has always been on the forefront of adopting new technologies. We are now at the forefront of a wide range of new green technologies that have a lot of potential. Why not embrace that? Why not see how we can use that as a military? If you can use these green technologies to make units more self-sustaining, then we don't have to supply them in the way we are supplying them now. And I have run more than 20 operations, and logistics is the biggest cost driver of any mission. Logistics is also the biggest risk factor of any mission. So if you can use green technologies to lower your footprint and to reduce your logistical burden, then that will be an enormous operational benefit. And if you can, through electrification, for instance, build vehicles that are more silent, then that also has an operational benefit. If you can build vessels that are more self-sustaining so that they don't have to harbor every day or every few days, then that also has an operational benefit. So I would say look at the potential that green technologies bring us and work together with the defense industries to find next generation solutions using the potential of those technologies. And on the smaller capabilities, we can use the current technologies immediately. If a civil car can drive on electricity, why can't a military car drive on it? But for the larger, the bigger vessels and the jet planes, that's of course harder. The technology is not there yet. So there we need to invest in research and development and see how we can come to more sustainable solutions together with the defense industries. So that's on the mitigation part. But there is also an enormous adaptation part. And adaptation has an internal side and an external side. Internally, we need to protect our infrastructure against natural disasters, against hurricanes, etc. We both have a presence in the Caribbean. We both have suffered under the Hurricane Irma, destroying the whole island of Saint Martin. And so we know the impact of it, which means that we also know that how important it is to protect vital infrastructure against these influences. And in the Netherlands, half of our population lives below the sea level. So we know the importance of protecting the population and our vital infrastructure. And that's also the case for military installations that are often in coastal areas. But secondly, also internally, we need to look at how can our soldiers work in all climate circumstances. We have to work in temperatures up to 50 degrees Celsius. How can they survive there? How can they maintain their operational readiness in such circumstances, which means that we have to develop new kinds of clothing with ventilation systems integrated into it and look at new technologies to help them maintain their operational readiness in those circumstances, which is also the case for our future tanks, our future vessels, our future airplanes. So we have to climate-proof the organization, and that's the internal side. The external side is about supporting adaptation programs in the fragile potential conflict countries around us. Avoiding is better than solving. That's what I've learned, because if you have to react when it goes wrong, it costs you a lot of lives. But if you can prevent it from happening, that's much better. So if we can help build resilience, especially in Northern Africa and the Middle East, by partnering with those countries, by helping the militaries in those countries to become more climate resilient and be able to deal with the effects of climate change, by supporting adaptation programs so that they can avoid climate change leading to more insecurity, I think we should do that.
And you talked about comprehensive changes, so global changes, and one particularity of the problem of climate change is that it's global and everyone should act. So if I try to sum up what you said, and it's a lot, you said a lot, but you see the military as both a key stakeholder for resilience and a catalyzer for innovation. But when we talk about climate change, we also talk about more systemic change. So do you see how the military can get involved in a rather really systemic change and be part, besides innovation, because innovation is part of this systemic change, but besides innovation, how could the military be involved in a rather global change of the system in which we live, but the system which causes the problem?
Yeah, that's a good question, a very hard question also to find answers to that. And I think that's a role that the military could play to help security-proof adaptation programs.
All right.
To bring the security dimension into those programs and make sure that all these adaptation efforts don't lead to insecurity. But also see how we can include the local security institutions in those fragile countries, how they can become part of the solution. And we can help doing that by partnering up with those institutions and helping them to become part of the solution. So we cannot solve it. We cannot solve the problem, but I think we can contribute in the ways that I described.
And now I would like to go to a rather more specific issue, which is the water scarcity. I've heard you talking about that before, and you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that the water problem was at the core of the issue in Afghanistan and your experience in Afghanistan. Yeah. And it's directly related with climate change, because climate change will have an impact on water accessibility and availability. So could you please get more in depth into that topic of water scarcity, how you see it, maybe what worked on, if you worked on water scarcity, and if you felt a change this summer or in the past years, because here in France, this summer, so summer 2022, has been really particular because we had a lot of droughts. So we realized that climate change and water availability could be a security issue. So that was the French Eureka, but maybe the Netherlands had been faced with that issue for a longer time. So talk about that water scarcity issue.
Well, the fact that French villages were closed off water, didn't have any water coming from the from their taps in the houses, only shows how close it's coming, how nearby it is. Also, even in the Netherlands, we have a very moderate scenario in the Netherlands, and the water is our oldest friend and our oldest enemy. I would say that climate change is all about water. So climate change brings temperature rise. Temperature rise means that the snow is melting all over the world. The polar caps, the Arctic area the snow will almost be gone within several years from now. So it's very rapidly. But all over the world, we also see changes in precipitation patterns. So for me, climate change is all about water. And the solution to climate change is also about finding solutions to secure access to water and with that, access to food, to ensure food security. So that makes water, for me, the central point of climate change.
And water scarcity could also be a dispute matter between countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could also both be a dispute matter and a dialogue arena. Because in some conflicting situation, it could be one way to get both stakeholders at the table when they have to, discuss and try to find an agreement to make sure their population is not in water stress. So did you encounter such situation, or how do you feel that this topic is really unique because it's both an issue and a solution at the same time?
No, I completely agree. And managing that is very hard. But the opportunity in it is that water scarcity is a problem for all of the people in the country. So whether they like it or not, they need to find a solution together. And there is a very interesting program called the Water, Peace and Security Program. And they have done cases in Iraq, in Africa, different African countries, on how to manage water when it is very scarce. And by building that understanding, they are also building kind of a common ground to come to solutions on how to divide that water. So that's a very interesting mechanism that they use to come solutions on water. And I think that is needed, because often it's not only the case that there is a scarcity, but also the case that there is a lot of dispute over access to water. And especially in rivers, because rivers run through different countries. And the River Nile is a very famous example. The whole population of Egypt lives on the River Nile. It depends on the water of the river. And Ethiopia is building a big Renaissance dam controlling the flow of water to Egypt, which of course is a big dispute between the two countries. But it also brings them together to find a solution that both countries have sufficient water. So water to me is really the most determining factor in climate change.
And I had one more question about water that is rather a step aside, or something that we don't talk about that much. So you mentioned the control of water as an instrument of power. Mm-hmm. And we're now more and more using techniques that are changing the weather, controlling where it rains, where it doesn't rain. Yeah. Do you think that also could be an instrument of power or a destabilization tool, or that it's at the moment at such minimal scale that it wouldn't represent a risk compared to all the other phenomena that you mentioned?
No, I think it can be part of the solution, although geoengineering, I find that a very risky subject. If every country starts putting a screwdriver into the atmosphere, what are the effects of that? It could bring short-term solutions, but what are the longer-term effects? Mm-hmm. So I find that quite risky, and certainly not something that every country should do separately. So this is something that you really need to research very good together, because else we might bring changes to the world that we didn't foresee and that we don't like. But technology does bring a lot of solutions. I'm convinced of that. Let me give you one example. I'm involved in an innovation of somebody who came to me during a Future Force conference that I organized. I think those kind of platforms are more needed now because we need more comprehensive answers. And in that conference, there was also an artist building sculptures. And he came to me and he said, "General, these are great stories, but I have a solution to solve the world problem on water. I want to extract water from desert air. And I want to do that with very limited power, with a solar panel." And he was talking for 10 minutes, very enthusiastically, and I couldn't say one word because he was full of it. In the end, I wanted to wish him good luck. But then I thought, well, what if this works? Just imagine if he can make an invention that can produce water in the desert, then all those villages there can stay where they are, don't have to migrate. They can sustain their families in the ways they have been doing until now. So it can prevent a lot of insecurity from happening. So I said to him, okay, I'll offer you an opportunity. Next week, put your team together. We put you in a plane. We bring you to Mali in the desert, and you can test your device. At first he was a bit shocked because that was a bit more soon than he expected. But he did it, and he went to the desert, and he succeeded in producing 1 glass of water per day.
From a sculpture?
With a very small device, with one solar panel, to extract that from the air. So that the invention worked, and he was inspired by a can of cold soda that you put on the table in the summertime. And on the outside of that can, you see all kinds of condensation drops. So the air, the warm air around it condensates on that can. And he was inspired by that. And he thought, I want to use that principle to produce water. And he further developed this product into a device that he delivered last year that was able to produce 30 liters of water. And now it becomes interesting. Per day, yeah, on the solar energy. Completely self-sustaining with cheap technology. And such a device can sustain a whole family in Mali or wherever. So now it becomes interesting. But I went to our employers branch and I said I would be ashamed if a country like the Netherlands, we are a water management country, if we wouldn't have a company in our country that is not willing to produce this. And I would be ashamed if I had to go to China or another country to do this. And of course, I was a bit stirring it up. But we went looking for it, and we found a company. They are now building a prototype. And I have good faith that next year we can take it in production and deliver it, especially in those regions. And then it can become a tool, a development tool, to support adaptation programs and to make sure that people living in dry areas can survive and can stay there and can have a living there. And I think this is a great example, not only of what innovation can bring, but also of what one person can have as a kind of an impact. And that's my call to the private sector. Open the doors to the young innovators, open the doors to the startups, and try to look at the potential of out-of-the-box solutions. Because we need really new solutions. We need to find new ways of producing water, food, and goods. And that means that we need to move to circularity. So my call upon all the private companies is focus your innovation on circularity. Make yourself less dependent upon natural resources, because they will become scarce, they will become very expensive, and there will be more and more competition over those resources with all the effects connected to that. So if you want to future-proof your own company, innovate on circularity and make sure that you are more independent from those resources. And then we can sustain 11 billion people on this planet. So I'm positive that we can, but we do have to make that shift. We have to leave the industrial age behind us and the way we have learned to produce behind us and move to the age of circularity. But I think that defense, going back to defense, can be a platform for that innovation. Many of the innovations that we now use also in our civil world origin from defense. The internet is a defense invention. The zipper, the microwave, you name it.
I knew about the internet, I didn't know about all the others.
Yeah, the GPS. So if defense starts embracing green technologies and starts looking at the potential of green technologies, and the US is doing that, they are building, for instance, very small nuclear reactors that can sustain a village or a town, but also a military base. So these kind of innovations within the military are dual use, can also be used outside the military. So I think the military can play a role if they start looking at how can we become more self-sustaining in the way we operate and what technologies should we develop to become more self-sustaining. These same technologies can also be used in the civil sector. If we build naval vessels that don't have to resupply constantly, that can be more self-sustaining, then that can also be used in the civil shipping industries. So in that case, I think defense can be a platform for innovation.
And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the future? But you just said that to future-proof something or a company or an organization, it requires innovation, circularity. Do you have something to add in the way you envision the future, apart from all the things you mentioned about the future of the industrial or the productivity system?
It's an enormous adaptation process, and also we as consumers need to change. We need to change our behavior. We need to change our demands. We need to be more aware of the ecological footprint of everything we do. And once you become aware of it, you can make more choices and minimize your footprint. But we also need to find, through innovation, ways that we can maintain that level of welfare that we have and prosperity that we have in a different way. That we can still fly to our holiday, but in a way that we are not destroying our planet. And so a large part of the solution is in behavioral change, and we can all do that. But that will not solve the complete problem. Another large part is in innovations to build more circular solutions. And the example I gave you on water is a completely circular solution, because all the water he produces out of the air. And in the air there is much more water than in the ground. We don't recognize that, but all the water we extract will at some moment evaporate again and go back into the air. So it's not damaging anything if you use it that way. And we need more of these kind of innovations.
So the final word of this interview would be circularity and innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, General, for this interview, for coming here and for sharing with us all those visions of the future and your experience and how you raised awareness, and you will continue raising awareness about climate security. A whole new topic. It's new in the term that it's been on the table for less than 50 years, but a topic that we'll have to tackle together. And I'm honored and I'm really happy to had this discussion with you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Allez plus loin sur www.défenseclimat.fr. Ce podcast, développé par l'IRIS, a été rendu possible grâce au soutien financier de la Direction générale des relations internationales et de la stratégie du ministère des Armées.